This time on Books That Changed My Life. So many people mentioned in this book. Pablo Picasso, Duchamp,
Pissarro, and Matisse, yes. Gertrude Stein was in Paris in a moment where everybody who was about to create modern art was unknown. Their painted art, their sculpted art, helped her see language differently. I mean, it just makes your brain smoke.
The three geniuses of whom I wish to speak are Gertrude Stein, Pablo Picasso, and Alfred Whitehead.
Yes.
She's calling herself a genius.
Absolutely, with no hesitation. People come together that are so exquisitely talented, and it's as if it's in the air for all of them to try things and stay in touch with what their neighbor is working on.
And inspiring each other.
And inspiring each other, yes. Capturing something in time, which in that moment may be something that people absolutely walk past, and then something happens years and decades later. It grows into the moment. That is the mystery of art.
Big question. How did this change your life? Welcome to the Syndicate X Library, where we love books, especially books that have changed lives. Today, we're joined by none other than Melissa Manchester. She's an actress, a Grammy Award-winning singer, songwriter, and she's taught at the USC's Thornton School of Music. She's going to be talking about the book that changed her life, the Autobiography of Alice B. Toklas by Gertrude Stein. What do you think of the library?
Spectacular.
Fun, right?
Just fantastic. So do people donate their collections, or do you purchase collections?
There have been a few collections donated, yes. But for the most part, it's my interests in curation. When Annie retired from the Hammer last year, she gave us her books. We have Matt Damon's books from when he moved from here to the East Coast. There's a couple more, but it's a hard one because we're out of room. We just bought a building down the street and that's full. So
amazing. Just amazing. I have to get this copy. I just saw this because you can't find the autobiography in most bookstores anymore, but you can find that edition online somewhere. So
it's beautiful.
It is very beautiful.
Well designed.
Yes. Mine is from a long time ago.
My significant other's name is Melissa, but she goes by Missy.
Yes, so do I.
You do?
Yes.
You can tell if it's a friend or not by who says Missy versus Melissa?
Yeah, it's a childhood nickname, so.
Did your mom say Melissa?
Only if it was in that tone.
Yeah, it's funny. My mother-in-law does Melissa middle name, last like da-da-da-da-da. Mm-hmm. She's, in that mode. So tell me about the CD.
This is my 25th album called Review. It is the re-recording of several of my charted hits. It's a thank you to the fans who have walked this over 50-year journey with me. And there are harmonic tweaks that I've introduced in these well-known songs. There are no fades. Everything ends because fades are...
Thing of the past?
Well, there's no such thing as a fade in nature. Songs end. Mm. And, having been a performer for so long, I just wanted to let that be part of each performance. And, I'm proud of it.
You have some guests on here.
I do. I re-recorded Midnight Blue with the incredible Dolly Parton, and re-recorded the song I wrote with Kenny Loggins, Whenever I Call You Friend. I finally got a chance to record it with him, and this is my own interpretation. And he was great. And I did videos on all of the songs, and But the thing was, it had been released a while ago, but I was on a national tour with the musical Funny Girl. And so this was released, but I couldn't do anything to support it. So now here I am, speaking of it.
Supporting it and promoting it. And
Yeah.
What did you order to drink?
Water.
Water.
Yes.
Well, you're
I watched
hardcore.
Yeah, I watched you speak with E.A. Hanks and you having your martinis, and I thought, well, that's a lot.
She had no problem.
She had no problem.
She was great.
She was. It was a
I
wonderful.
can't drink martinis like that.
No. It was a wonderful conversation.
So smart.
I found her so fascinating, and I read Cloud Atlas right away after watching that, and it was fascinating.
So the book we're here to talk about today, the book that changed your life.
Yes.
The Autobiography of Alice B. Toklas by Gertrude Stein.
Have you read it?
Yeah, we've gone through it pretty deep. You'll see I have some points that we'll talk about.
Great.
Kind of walk me through how this came into your life. So you were 17?
I was 17. I was introduced to the book by a friend, and he had introduced me to a lot of writers that I hold near and dear to my heart. He was a very thoughtful guy. I read this and I could not fathom what I was reading, not just because of the language, but because of the moment in time that she was writing about. And of course, the device is so nuts that I had to just keep wrapping my head around the fact that this is not an autobiography at all, but a device to present a life where Gertrude would not write about herself, but wrote about herself in the voice of her partner, Alice. And it was fascinating. And the construct of the sentences, everything was interesting, everything.
So let's just talk about that first part, though, because what are your thoughts on that in the sense that she's writing about herself using her partner as the catalyst, which is kind of like when people like talk about themselves in the third person in a sense, like.
Yes, it may have been a way for her to release all the stories, because I know that people have asked me to write a book for a long time, and I keep starting it and I can't find the way in because it's all about the tone. And maybe Gertrude had that same issue. She could not find the tone writing about herself. But if she wrapped herself in the mantle of Alice Toklas,
Enough separation.
There you go. And suddenly the stories and the people and the incidents and the achievements and the heartbreak came through. So it's endlessly fascinating.
Yeah, really fun. And the style, form equals function in a sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
That style kind of feeds to it.
My book is now a wreck, like your book is a wreck, because as much.
I would love. Can I see though?
Well, yeah. I mean, I wanted to protect it because it's a beautiful old book, but
I'll be really careful.
No, it's fine. I end up underlining things in pen so I can find them again.
So you underline.
I do. I underline.
A little highlight.
Very little.
And is this original to when you first read it? You've had this with you since 17?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's so, I mean, it's kind of intimate in a way.
It is indeed. It is indeed.
Okay, so the first thing is, and the reason why we pulled these books is there are so many people mentioned in this book.
That's the thing about the book, is the book really was a North Star for me, because it showed me what kind of life is possible as an artist, and that let's talk about Gertrude, that she was in a moment where everybody who was about to create modern art was unknown. And she and her brother started collecting the unknown Picasso and the unknown Matisse and buying their paintings for maybe $20, which was a fortune for the artists who were also poor. And she would go to specific art dealers because she knew that they favored them. And it was just, and everybody was hearing about each other for the first time. I mean, it was a roadmap of the kind of life I wanted to have.
And it's based in Paris, right?
It is, yes.
Yeah, it's very special.
Well, yes, and Gertrude's brother came over to Paris first, and Gertrude, who was a medical student, had enough of that and went over to Paris to meet her brother. And her brother was more informed about art. And all Gertrude knew about were landscapes. So she kept going to these young art dealers who were established, and she kept asking for landscapes, and he would go into the atelier, and she would hear him rummaging around, and she'd bring back a painted fruit by Cézanne. And she said, no, no, I want landscapes. So he'd go back up and move around lots of canvases, and she'd bring back a Matisse that had a very little bit of a landscape in the corner of the picture. She said, yes, I want the landscape, but I want that all over the canvas. So he would take the Matisse back, and he would just rummage around until he found something that suited her. And the art dealer ended up to be so hysterical because of the stupid Americans who didn't realize what they were looking at. But that's where her journey began with her brother.
What about the relationship between Alice and Gertrude?
In the autobiography, nothing specific is mentioned. As close as we get is that Alice types Gertrude's manuscripts on a very primitive typewriter. She's obviously introduced they start becoming traveling companions. And by the time Gertrude writes, a rose is a rose is a rose, which Alice found on a scrap of paper. And one of their friends put it on dishes and towels and anything they could find. There's nothing of heat to convey the depth of their relationship.
And you think that's just because of the time?
I think it was definitely because of the time, but I thought it was so sweet on the very last page of it. She began to tease me and say I should write my autobiography. This is Gertrude about Alice. And just think, she would say, what a lot of money you would make. She then began to invent titles for my autobiography, My Life with the Great Wives of Geniuses, because Alice's position in the salon was always to be with the wives, right? I have sat with my 25 years with Gertrude Stein. Then she began to get serious and say, but really seriously, you ought to write your autobiography. Finally, I promised that if during this summer I could find time, I would write my autobiography. When Ford Maddox Ford was editing the Transatlantic Review, he once said to Gertrude Stein, I'm a pretty good writer and a pretty good editor and a pretty good businessman, but I find it very difficult to be all three at once. Alice is saying, I am a pretty good housekeeper and a pretty good gardener and a pretty good needlewoman and a pretty good secretary and a pretty good editor and a pretty good vet for dogs. And I have to do them all at once, and I found it difficult to add being a pretty good author. About 6 weeks ago, Gertrude Stein said, it does not look to me as if you were ever going to write that autobiography. You know what I'm going to do? I am going to write it for you. I am going to write it as simply as Defoe did the autobiography of Robinson Crusoe. And she has, and this is it. Okay. There seemed to be a nuttiness to it all, which I found so appealing because, you know, in the 20s, they could not talk about the depth of their love for each other, not even the devotion. It all had to be so sort of glib, and the Alice's position of being with the wives while the genius husbands were talking with Gertrude. So it's all very sort of triangulated, angular stuff, the unsaid stuff. But nonetheless, the journey of the two of them was stunning.
Yeah, the soul of it's there.
Absolutely.
The architecture of it, I guess. Okay, so right off the bat, I may say that only 3 times in my life have I met a genius, and each time a bell within me rang and I was not mistaken. And I may say in each case, it was because there was any general recognition of the quality of genius in them. The 3 geniuses of whom I wish to speak are Gertrude Stein, yep, Pablo Picasso, and Alfred Whitehead.
Yes.
She's calling herself a genius.
Absolutely. With no hesitation.
That kind of sets the tone.
Yeah. And the thing that was so interesting about what she started to become clear about, not in pursuit of being a genius, one is or one isn't, I guess. She wanted to create writing that would do to literature what Cubism, for instance, did to art. And so...
In Cubism, just for people that don't understand, is an abstraction.
Correct. What she said was, my pursuit is not in paragraphs. My pursuit is in sentences. She said paragraphs are emotional, sentences are not. And so she was looking to see how you could deconstruct sentences to affect an effect. And so that was interesting because she didn't know that in the beginning. She wanted to be a writer, but she didn't know what that actually meant. And so that these incredible young artists, unknown artists, affected her so. And their painted art, their sculpted art, helped her see language differently. I mean, it just makes your brain smoke.
Yeah, and perspectives, right? Because in a sense, like, just if we take painting, for example, for a long time, painting was a reproduction of reality.
Exactly right.
And then it starts to abstract.
Exactly right.
It's interesting at the Picasso Museum in Barcelona, as you go through it, it starts off with this, kind of first painting of Communion, and it's a recreation of reality. And then by the end, there's no connection between reality and what's on the canvas.
Right.
That abstraction. Do you think that abstraction and, Cubism, all of it, might have influenced the change in perspective of writing the book?
Oh, I think so, absolutely.
Because it's not linear and a recreation of what an autobiography would normally be.
Right, right, yes. And you also see, as you're reading it, that it's almost as if you're reading somebody stumble to find clarity sometimes. I can't give you an example right now, but the sentences, there are commas, there are periods, although she railed against commas. She had a soft spot for periods, but commas made her nuts. And her editors would insist on a comma once in a while because she would write these endless sentences, and they were trying to publish her and get her to be a successful writer. You saw language have actual texture to her, for me anyway. And so very little was straight ahead unless she was talking about a person. And even that was impressionistic. The thing also was that she was in Paris in this sublime moment when all of these young artists, unknown, were starting to show. She was at the salon where Matisse showed one of his paintings where people were so outraged by it, they were trying to scrape the paint, chip the paint on the painting. She was in Paris when, I think it was Firebird was performed and people were throwing tomatoes at the stage. You hear about these moments in history, and now we regard all of these pieces of art as stunning and huge achievements. And she was in that moment right before that happened, when people couldn't fathom what it was. The colors being used, the way light was being captured, the music, the plays, the poetry. It was just, it was just a lot for my little brain.
Would you describe that time as artists challenging convention?
Yes, absolutely. I think it was artists who had grown up in disciplines that they understood, the conventional disciplines, but then they just started to, there are times in the history of the world where through some divine design, people come together that are so exquisitely talented, and it's as if it's in the air for all of them to try things and stay in touch with what their neighbor is working on, and taking that altered concept that they all started with, the altered convention, and tried something new. And suddenly you have the modern art movement, which simply didn't exist 15 minutes before all of these people came before. It started with Pissarro, and Pissarro is mentioned because he was the father of the Impressionists. He was the first one to go out into the wheat fields and start painting outside instead of inside, where that kind of light was acceptable. Outdoor light was radical. It was revolutionary. And he was busy painting the wheat fields and died destitute. But it's impossible to think of him as destitute now because his works are invaluable. And so yes, it's remarkable when something is in the air and people are somehow brought together just because they're in the neighborhood. But what a neighborhood it is. And that they would all meet at her salon and that she would be able to feed them because they were so terribly poor. And the way that she would barter in her way is to buy their art. And suddenly her walls were full from the floor to and including the ceiling of her art. It was incredible.
Yeah, it's also interesting in those times how business and the structure of the way art was displayed and, what was revered is challenged, and how that, tension, one story, and it's kind of referenced in here a little bit, is Duchamp and the nude descending a staircase, and how that was rejected in a format that was, no jury, no prize, where a lot of people were going to come through this art show, and it was a way for you to get your stuff seen.
Yes.
But there also was this, kind of silent set of rules that you couldn't challenge in a way, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah, and yet they carried on and they conversed and they compared, and sometimes she was compassionate and would sit one of her beloved young artist friends opposite his latest accomplishment at her dining table, and sometimes she was a little wicked and would sit her beloved young artist opposite his nemesis, who is also
Well, that's the story in here, is when she had artists over for dinner, like Picasso,
Matisse. Yeah,
she would set them in front of their paintings, and the only one that realized what she had done at the end was Matisse.
Exactly.
When he stood back.
Exactly.
But they were very competitive, right?
Very competitive.
And she was trying to feed their ego and be a good host.
She was, because she got something from all of these relationships. And, I've had the privilege of having some stunningly talented people come through my life as well. And I see reflected in her life that as some of them stayed in her life for a very long time, and some just sort of blew through and shared with her what they needed to share and what she could purchase of theirs, or just have exquisite discussions of theirs with them. But then they went off, or they were killed in a war or something. And so it just sort of, it gives you sort of a roadmap for what an artist's life could look like.
What are examples of people that have come through your life that you would consider like special in their talent?
Well,
and what makes them different?
I had the opportunity many years ago to write with Bernie Taupin, who was the lyricist for Elton John, had been all of these decades. And Bernie was unusual in that he was never in the room with me. He would chat with me a little bit, and then I never heard from him again. And one day I would get an envelope, a manila envelope, with a finished lyric in it. And the quality of the lyric was so stunning that it didn't need music. It really could have just been put in a lovely frame and hung on a wall. But B, more importantly, it sung itself. It sung itself.
Like the melody was there on its own?
Yeah. And his use of language, his metaphors, his understanding of the subject matter was so rich in so few lines. which is the mystery of songwriting, because it's not poetry. Each line has to move the melody forward. Each melody has to move the line forward. It was a magnificent thrill to write with him, and I only wrote with him a few times, but it was singular. And I've written with many other great songwriters, but he was singular in that nobody ever quite used language like that. But again, I've had stunning writing partners. So, yeah.
Is there a characteristic that's different about like Bernie in the sense that?
Well, there was a song that he wrote called For the Working Girl. And the structure was that each verse was a vignette. And he captured the struggle of these three different characters. And the chorus was so singular in their plea, in their passion, in their focus, that it was truly anthemic just on the page. And I set it to music and I recorded it. And one night I was on the road with my band. It was about 2 a.m. I was at a truck stop. And in those days, there were no women around. There were no women stage managers. There were no women lighting designers. There were no women truckers. I was mostly in a room. And I was at this diner with my band one night. It was about 2 a.m. And this woman comes over to me and she said, "Are you Melissa?" I said, "Yes." She said, I am a trucker." She said, "Thank you so much for the Working Girl. Nobody understands us. Nobody, but your song does. And I want to thank you for that." And she hugged me hard. And then she went into the night. And that's what a song can do.
You know, I grew up in Washington, and during the kind of, era of grunge and music that came out, and I played in bands. And that was a moment in time where you had all this talent and all of this incredible art coming out of one place. And in that moment, the thing that everybody kind of felt was that anything was possible.
Bingo. That's the thing. Those moments, I'm always fascinated by when a group of people come together and they are so spectacularly gifted. You do feel that anything is possible. And that is the green light that they see in front of them. And that was true in the 1950s in the Sid Caesar Your Show of Shows, where in the writer's room, it was Neil Simon and Woody Allen and Larry Gelbart, and one after another. And you thought, oh, this is just stunning. How did that happen? And this book was the first one I'd read about that. And it was just the kind of life I wanted. Yeah.
What to the connection for me, and like I said, we pulled books, is that feeling at this time, and Marcel Duchamp, when he, went to New York, the thing that he did there, and if Andy Warhol, like tons of artists will say that the thing that influenced me the most was Duchamp and the idea that I could be myself. And then if I put it in a gallery, they had to see it as art, which allowed a certain freedom of I can do the thing I want to do versus the thing I'm expected to do. And there's kind of there's a connection there between Paris and New York.
Oh, yeah. The thing I think that captures me, however, with this book is the sense of quiet on the streets. There was no distraction, not really. Maybe you heard a cart, or maybe you heard a new car, because it was in the teens. So you were still hearing horses. So if you had found the hours of the day to work, you weren't hearing somebody else's radio playing in the alleyway. It was just quieter. She writes that she would write at night. Gertrude would write at night and go to sleep before dawn because she didn't want to be annoyed by the birds. She understood the power of solitude. And because they had so many people dropping in at their salons, she had to, particularly on Saturday nights, she had to wait until the hour when she knew nobody else was going to show up, which was about 11 o'clock. Now, I don't know about you, but 11 o'clock for me, I'm already sleeping most of the time, unless I'm performing.
8:30.
Yeah. Unless I'm performing, and then I'm up until 2 or 3 in the morning. But so the presence of the act of creating and then going someplace and just hearing some street sounds, maybe a baby crying, but then meeting friends at a cafe. It's a quieter time, and I just felt I could really feel that in the writing. Yeah.
Okay. This right here, Picasso.
Yeah?
Read that for me.
Okie doke. Sure, she said, as Pablo once remarked, when you make a thing, it is so complicated making it that it is bound to be ugly. But those that do it after you, they don't have to worry about making it, and they can make it pretty. And so everybody can like it when the others make it.
So is he saying the first one through the wall gets a little bloody?
Could be. It could be. I love that. I love that. Here's another one. It may seem very strange to everyone nowadays that before this time, Matisse had never heard of Picasso, and Picasso had never ever met Matisse. But at that time, every little crowd lived its own life and knew practically nothing of any other crowd. Matisse on the Quai Saint-Michel and in the Independent did not know anything of Picasso and Montmartre and Sagot. They all, it is true, had been in the very early stages bought one after another by Mademoiselle Weil, the bric-a-brac shop in Montmartre. Can you imagine a bric-a-brac matron bought all of this art because nobody else had heard of these people? I mean, really? And it had been a fruitful winter. In the long struggle with the portrait of Gertrude Stein, Picasso passed from the Harlequin, the charming early Italian period, to the intensive struggle, which was to end in Cubism. Gertrude Stein had written the story of Melanctha, the Negress, the second story of 3 Lives, which was the first definitive step away from 19th century and into the 20th century in literature. I mean, there is a reflection of her where Picasso is moving into Cubism. She's moving into more, let's say, cubistic literature, for lack of a better word, more fragmented, more intentional reshaping of literature. So they, to answer your question of long ago, yes, I think it was just in the air. They just kept reflecting what could be.
And inspiring each other.
Inspiring each other, yes. And these were not perfect people by any means. I mean, it took me a very long time, particularly as the daughter of a musician, to see that these were flawed human beings. It's just that they occupied a space in such a singular fashion, in such a singular moment, that it was worth my time.
Yeah, the next quote I had is what we talked about already, how she sat them all in front of their own paintings.
Yeah.
And only Matisse noticed.
Yes, and this is, speaking of the device of a rose is a rose is a rose, it was I, Alice, who found it in one of Gertrude Stein's manuscripts and insisted upon putting it as a device on the letter paper, on the paper linen, and anywhere that she would permit that I could put it. I am very pleased with myself for having done so. I mean, that's as romantic as they get in this book. There's not a whiff of anything deeper or sensual or sexual in the book at all. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So on mine here, I'm on page 160, which I'm sure is quite different, but it's a part about Duchamp. So it says, it was not long after Mabel Dodge went to America, and it was the winter of the Armory Show, which is a famous show in New York, that at the time, people in Paris perceived Americans as being, cowboys and like savages and uncultured. So they were kind of bringing their culture to us,
Yes.
in a sense, right?
Yeah.
It was a big deal. It was a big moment for art in America. So was the Winter of the Armory show, which was the first time the general public had a chance to see any of these pictures. It was there that Marcel Duchamp's nude descending the staircase was shown. It became a big deal in America. New York Times parodied it. It was a huge sort of thing. And so then she says, I was always perfectly able to understand the enthusiasm that Marcel Duchamp aroused in New York when he went there in the early years of the war. His brother had just died from the effects of his wounds, and his other brother was still at the front, and he himself was inept from military service. He was very depressed and went to America. Everyone loved him so much that it was a joke in Paris that when any American arrived in Paris, the first thing he would say was, "How is Marcel?" And I remember this growing up in Seattle is everywhere we went, people would, whatever the music was we were playing, they would classify it as grunge, and they would say, "Do you know Nirvana?"
Yeah.
Like everything was Nirvana, then Pearl, but everywhere you went on tour, you're from Seattle. Oh, do you know Nirvana?
Yeah.
Sort of a thing.
Yeah. I love the fact that the Cohn sisters had visited her and her brother, Gertrude and her brother, and they also understood nothing of modern art, and they begrudgingly bought a few paintings that became the center of the Baltimore Museum of Art, which they co-founded. You just never know what is in the air with art and why somebody would say, just buy it. I know you don't understand it now, but buy it. It's like Picasso's story about Gertrude's portrait. By the time it was finished, because he had erased her face and all of that, and by the time she saw it finished, she had cut off all of her hair. Prior to that, she had worn it in a bun. And I'm paraphrasing. Or somebody said, "But this doesn't really look like Gertrude." And Picasso said, "She will." So I mean, it's just having a sense of capturing something in time, which in that moment may be something that people absolutely walk past or look past or listen to once and let go. And then something happens, and years and decades later, it grows into the moment. That is the mystery of art. And that I've had my own experience where it happens and you think it literally has grown into this moment. It means something entirely different than when it was created 50 years ago or 100 years ago. And it has this renewed vibrancy and importance. And, and it's all through her journey with her artists, Hemingway's writing or Matisse's paintings or Picasso's paintings. And, Picasso was blessed with living a very long life, as was Matisse, but a lot of them weren't. And they had their moments with her and she with them. I have to read you something funny. She says, this is when she was working on her language. "I see words and sentences, and there is for me only one language, and that is English." Now, she's been living in Paris for a while. She has no intention of learning the language. "One of the things I have liked all these years is to be surrounded by people who know no English. It has left me more intensely alone with my eyes and my English. I do not know if it would have been possible to have English be so all in all to me otherwise. And they none of them could read a word I wrote. Most of them did not even know that I did write. No, I like living with very many people and being all alone with English and myself. I write for myself and strangers." It's so cockamamie, but it's so wonderful.
Yeah, she's taking out the middle.
She's taking out the middle, like in a loaf of bread.
Yeah. That's funny because I think, like, when I write, there's a couple people that are close to me that I will read it to. And if I'm really vulnerable, I'll just leave it with them. But most of the time I like to read it to them. But it would be hard to cut out the middle. Because the act of me, I learn more through the act of reading it to them than I do from their opinion.
Yes.
Because that moment of vulnerability, when you're saying the words, teaches you a lot about what you're doing, or for me.
Absolutely. And it brings into focus what it is you think you've created.
Yeah.
As opposed to...
Because there's now a spectator.
Yes. I call that the shrinkage theory. When I'm in the studio, many times, you think you're doing, you're really capturing the essence of the inner world of the piece and blah, blah, blah. And then the pizza delivery guy shows up and you say, well, what do you think? And he'll go, it's okay. And it shrinks. And you have to think, what have I fallen so in love with that I've lost perspective on? What do I need to rethink and reframe or whatever? But when something holds its shape, when you read it to somebody and they go, yes, or they bring even more insight to what you thought you had written, where you're saying, I didn't realize I wrote all of that. I mean,
But she's cutting that out. She's just doing it herself, and then she's publishing it, and a stranger can read it, which is crazy.
It's kooky,
but ballsy. Like, it takes a lot of confidence to do that.
It's interesting because while it is true that medicine, math, and art are from the same part of the brain, and she did start as a medical student, it may, and I'm not exactly sure why her brothers had this fascination with art and she followed their lead. It may have been interesting if she didn't have the rigidity of the discipline of math and therefore medicine to inform how she wrote, what she was trying to write. I'm not sure if I get a sense that she wrote from the outside in or the inside out. It was almost formulaic, but not quite, because the sentences have to be about something, and you have to care about your subject to keep you compelled. But I don't know if there was a sense of sentence massaging for the sake of sentence massaging, as opposed to supporting the actual subject that she was caring about. I'm not exactly sure. I'm not exactly sure if it was everything was more of an exercise, although she loved her pursuit. But it's interesting,
Yeah, it is. There's a moment here where I really love. So at the end of chapter 5,
okay,
she ends the chapter. It says, in short, in this spring and early summer of 1914, the old life was over. And then the next chapter is the war.
The war, exactly.
I just love that moment between the ending and the next thought.
Yep. Yeah, and they volunteered and they did everything that they could to help the wounded, and they were with the American, what was it called? Well, anyway, they were working for the front, and they were very committed and left their home and left everybody, and everybody in the group also left. Some became soldiers and some just moved to another country for a while, and it was hard. And everybody was, and times were bleak and cold. You couldn't find coal at all. And the rations were real. And so, yeah, she wrote about that. And at that point, she and Alice were together. And yeah.
Then there's another part in here that just, it speaks to the vulnerability of an artist, even when you're actually trying to bond with them in a sense, right? So Man Ray photographed her. So he said, He showed us pictures of Marcel Duchamp and a lot of other people and asked if he might come and take photographs of the studio and Gertrude Stein. He did, and he also took some of me, and we were very pleased with the results. One day, she told him that she liked his photographs of her better than any other that had been taken except one snapshot I had taken of her recently. This seemed to bother Man Ray. So even in the attempt to bond and compliment that takeaway of, I love them, they're my favorite, except for this one.
Yeah, I think part of what was really interesting is that through the device of writing this non-autobiography of herself through the eyes of Alice Toklas, I think she was able to sort of see her sometimes orneriness, sometimes mischievousness, sometimes annoyance with particularly the wives. She didn't have much time for the wives, I must say. She had an appreciation for the wives of the geniuses, but that was Alice's department. Because they talked about food and they talked about children and all that. But I think Gertrude got a chance to sort of get a sense of herself in the world of telling of this story. Don't you think?
Mm-hmm.
Because
that separation.
Yes, the separation, and nobody was going to analysis. I mean, analysis was
There's no therapy.
Didn't exist, and so she got a sense of herself by reflecting back, including through meeting all the geniuses. Yeah.
Can you think of a time where this happened to you, where somebody paid you a compliment but then took it away? That affected you?
That paid me a compliment, then took it away?
Well, just took it away in the sense of your vulnerability as an artist, not that they meant to.
Well, yes. I mean, I've had opportunities where, close people would think they were being helpful by saying, well, the only reason you're being invited to this is because of who you are and what you have. And I'm thinking, is that supposed to be helpful? And, of course, if you lay that at their feet and say, this is really kind of insulting, and I'm sure that's not what you meant, and they're just so flustered because it's not what they meant, but it is it's a moment.
It's always interesting that when, as an artist, you put something out there, that you put all this work into, but also beyond work, like you went somewhere emotionally that you wouldn't have gone, and you're doing it all in the pursuit of this thing, and then you put it out, and then people put their own twist on it, and
that is always true.
It's a hard moment to listen to other people's idea, or even when just people underplay it.
Well, on the other hand, I mean, over the years, I have been abundantly blessed by people telling me what my songs meant to them in their hardest moments, in their most trying moments. And songs are, 3 minutes and 40 seconds, 4.5 minutes. They become life rafts for people sometimes. They help to clarify things. And that is the opposite, where you had no intention of being anybody's life raft. You're facing a blank piece of paper when you write. And so for something to have large wings, so to speak, is very touching. And
yeah, it's a funny, funny dance, I guess.
You never know. Yeah, you never know.
Yeah, there's another time she calls herself a genius in here.
Yeah. Oh, here, I found this. She says that listening to the rhythm of, she was talking about her puppy, Basket. She said, listening to the rhythm of his water drinking made her recognize the difference between sentences and paragraphs, that paragraphs are emotional and that sentences are not. She got that from listening to her dog lapping water. the connections just make your head scratch.
Yeah, what do you think about the moment in time here and this as a piece of art and current art and writing and music, and how much is it affected by this nonstop wave of social media like it's just it's an addiction in a sense, that dopamine hit. I was telling somebody this earlier, is like, I grew up in a time where to get studio time you had to have money, and when you went into the studio you were recording on tape, and if you messed up you had to do it again. You couldn't fix anything, and it was a big deal. Like,
if you walked into the studio with a magnet,
oh my gosh,
murder police.
Yeah.
Say.
And now we live in a time where you can record in your bedroom.
Exactly.
Access to the things that were hard to get are, easier than ever for anybody.
Right.
But the quality of the art has gone down quite a bit. And so how much of that is what you were kind of referencing, the noise and those beautiful little moments, and not appreciate, like, those beautiful little moments are amplified in a world where you don't have this wave of information and distractions.
Yeah, I mean, here was a world of true spaces in between inspiration and presentation, let's say. If you were at the Saturday night salon and she felt like reading something to you, or somebody felt like displaying a new painting, it was after months of work and meeting at cafes in the interim to discuss and wrestling with ideas. And none of that happened quickly. You could work on a painting for 2 years. You could work on a manuscript for months at a time. And in between, again, you were hearing a horse drawing a cart, or a brand new automobile, which was rare, or children playing, or a baby crying. But there was not, yes, there was competition because there was publishing, yes. And there were museum exhibits that you longed to get into. But the in-between part wasn't full of relentless noise and information. And also they were coming from earlier fashions of literature, and they were coming from earlier conventions of painting and sculpting. And the music that was coming out was on the shoulders of magnificent orchestral operatic composers. So the value of a melody leading a piece as opposed to percussion leading a piece, which is the norm of today. Percussion leads the way as opposed to a melody. And that started in the early 80s with disco. So I think, I do not know how artists do it today, although I do know that certain things never change. You got to pay dues in a club. You got to play on crappy instruments in a club. You have to hope that you don't sign a stupid record contract still, even though you may be more informed about royalties and how to get your songs out. And perhaps you can, post something on YouTube and get 1 million hits. And then what do? You still have to deal with managers. You still have to deal with lawyers. You still have to deal with all that stuff that as a young artist, mostly you don't understand. So there's a really good chance you're going to sign another stupid contract like most of us did. It's just that the congestion of noise, the congestion of art, it doesn't make the output more banal. It doesn't do that necessarily. It just makes the field more crowded. That's all. When I started, the record industry and radio was very different than it is now. I started before programming was computerized. I mean, I really started in another time. But nonetheless, I think that what remains is at the heart longs for melody, even though we don't hear it that much. We hear it some, and sometimes it's really beautiful and it breaks through. And I think for great art across the board, whether it's great painting or great literature, I think art has the power, the true magic to help us remember things we didn't realize we'd forgotten. It allows us to feel, it gives us permission in that way. And in that way, it can be really powerful. But if I was starting today, I would have to ask lots of friends where you begin.
It seems like to me that it's more crowded and things are more mimetic. They're more similar.
I agree.
There aren't too many things that you hear and you're like, wow, like, I've never heard it like that before.
I agree. And I think
that person has an opinion.
Yes.
They're trying to say something different than what everybody else is saying.
Well, I think part of that is because songs, for instance, are percussion driven as opposed to melody driven. And when things are melody driven, then the lines are longer, the ideas are longer and come to a resolution. And the brain is listening to a longer idea, so it's stretched and relaxed. And it meets you at the end where the composition comes at the end. But because things are percussive driven mostly today in terms of pop music, there are shorter phrases that are repeated and repeated and repeated. So that's okay. You know, it trains the listener to have shorter attention spans. But there's a trade-off. And I agree. Beautiful art peeks through, and then you think, that's a song. That's an interesting original story idea. That's a beautiful poem. But the truth is, I read the things that I discovered when I was 17 anon because they still mean something to me, and they are refreshing because they are my touchstones and because the way I remember them is true. And what they were as a North Star for the life I wanted ahead of me when I was 17 is still true. You know, I wanted an artist's life. I didn't realize the kind of rigor it would require to have that, but I found the courage and my curiosity stayed intact, and I was somewhat successful, not always. But my hunger was clear and it kept my focus. And so I just kept finding ways to do various paths, not always pop music. Sometimes I would write the score for a Disney animated feature, or I would write for theater, or I have this new concerto for piano and orchestra that is being debuted this weekend, because I said yes. Because I stayed curious.
It's good.
Yeah.
Big question. How did this change your life?
Well, it changed my life because it showed me what could be. I came from a very interesting creative family, and they had a very my sister and I were raised in a very lively household. So I wanted a lively life. I wanted to, lively meaning I wanted to find a way, as an artist, this is what it is. You find a way to make a living by living your life. That's what an artist is essentially doing. Through observation, through honing your craft. But essentially, that's what you're doing, because as an artist, you're looking via your curiosity for the next adventure, which will allow you to express something more that has hopefully not been expressed before, or in such a singular way that it's considered rare, which is, who knows about that. But, and I was very fortunate after I read this to be able to study songwriting with Paul Simon, who taught me about how to separate you from everybody else in your pursuit of songwriting. And then I got to meet other people, and I would take all kinds of odd, interesting jobs in New York City just to be around creative people, just to hear how they did their lives. I didn't want to be them. I just wanted to hear about them. I wanted to hear how they wrestled with whatever they were working on, whether it was an actor or a playwright or a novelist. I did, I was around Jim Henson and the first season of Sesame Street because I was a gopher in the editing room. I just was in the right place at the right time to try things. And this book lit the way for me.
It's incredible. Well, I appreciate you doing this.
Thank you very much.
It was really fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.